Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today on what I believe is one of the most important conversations we could possibly have at the Future Investments Initiative. Allow me to introduce you to Alexandra Cousteau. Not only is she an explorer and an oceans advocate, but she's also a member of the NEOM Advisory Board. And also our other guest, Jason Channel, who's the head of sustainable finance at Citi Global Insights. So, ladies and gentlemen, today, water makes up 71% of the planet, and yet SDG 14, the Sustainable Development Goal, linked to oceans, are the least funded of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And despite underfunding, ocean assets are valued at over more than 24 trillion US dollars. And if ocean-based industries were a national economy, they would be the world's 7th economy. Just let that sink in this room. Over the next 15 years, 8.4 trillion US dollars are at risk for ocean-related sectors. And so today, with these two magnificent people on the stage, we hope to better understand why it truly is the ocean's bottom line. So Alexandra Cousteau has founded the Oceans 2050, and not only is she an advisor to NEOM, she is also an individual who I'm very happy to co-collaborate with, and at the end of our panel, we'll explain to you about a project we're working on. But I'd love to ask you, Alexandra, what is the current status of ocean health, and what does it mean to our collective well-being on the environmental, economic, and social levels?
Thank you, Your Highness. Well, I think that there's a number of people in this audience who may have grown up watching my grandfather's films, The Underwater World of Jacques Cousteau. And those films he started making in the 1950s and 1960s, and actually the first film that he made, The Silent World, was largely shot in the Red Sea. And that was a time when the oceans were very abundant and diverse, and the life that he recorded there was a source of awe and inspiration for people around the world. Unfortunately, since that time, we've lost half of the blue natural capital in the world's oceans. Half of the fish and the whales and the creatures that used to live there have disappeared. And that has a real impact, not just on the intrinsic value of the ocean and place that we all love, it also has a big impact on our economies. The oceans are connected to food security, they're connected to coastal infrastructure, they're connected to climate change, they're connected to tourism, they are connected to every aspect of our societies. And as we lose more and more of the ocean, obviously those sectors are increasingly put at risk. But there was a seminal paper that came out a number of years ago that was authored by Professor Carlos Duarte called Rebuilding Marine Life. And it was a great source of hope for me, but also for many people in the ocean space, because it laid out a roadmap for how we can rebuild our oceans and rebuild the abundance there that not only brings us joy, but brings us that stability and that economic development. Because to be sure, there's no way that we can build an economy or make money or get a return on investments when we're dealing with a dead ocean. So this conversation, I think, is extraordinarily important because the oceans are key to the prosperity that we all aspire to.
So Jason, Alexandra lives in the world of ocean regeneration and every day works to advocate for not just the beauty, but the functional and practical reasons why we should be preserving the oceans and everything that comes with it. Tell us the bottom line. Why should every banker in this room care, every financier, every VC? Whoever is in this room, what do they need to hear from you as to why they need to support the oceans?
Well, I think just carrying on from Alexandra's comments, I mean, one of the things that struck us most in it, we put out a report recently, which everybody can find as GPS report on oceans from Citi. But within that, it talks about the fact that we get 50% of the oxygen that we breathe from oceans. It absorbs 30% of the CO2 and 90% of the heat. And I think one of the figures that shocked us was, many of us are running around the world at the moment trying to sort of limit temperature increases to 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees. If the oceans hadn't absorbed all of that heat and CO2, we would already be 35 degrees higher. So I think that, if there's one fact that people take away, it's that, about how absolutely critical oceans are to the sort of so-called twin crises of climate change and biodiversity. So it's hugely important from an environmental perspective. And as you say, it doesn't get the attention. But from a business perspective, what we highlighted in that report, we looked at 48,000 companies around the world, identified $4.3 trillion of direct revenue, which is at risk, and a further $27 trillion, which is indirectly at risk. And the reason it should matter to everybody in this room and everybody that owns or works for a business around the world is that attention is shifting, regulation is shifting. We have new things coming in like the TNFD, the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, and within that, one of the realms is the oceans. And corporates are going to have to start reporting about their dependency on the ocean and their impacts on the ocean. And the last thing I would say is be under no illusions that this isn't just shipping and ports and things like that. 80% of the impacts on the ocean come from terrestrial-based impacts, businesses, either from the CO2 or from waste, whether it's plastic, etc. So this isn't a siloed issue. This is absolutely critical for climate change, biodiversity, all the other SDGs. Doesn't get the attention it deserves, but it is coming in businesses' direction in a hurry.
So we talk about the fishing industry. We talk about lobstermen and fishermen. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, if you're a banker, these individuals have loans. They have mortgages. They have responsibilities. They have children. If you begin to take away the business opportunity because the oceans are no longer a source of income or viable job, you are all affected. Every bank is affected. Every loan infrastructure is affected. Every retail entity is affected. Where will the disposable income come from if they are not having their resources preserved and sustained? So, Alexandra, you are not an advocate of shutting down industry, but adding to abundance. What are the opportunities?
Well, there's a number of ways that we can do that. I think we want to, the most important thing, I think, is just how we imagine and envision the solutions and the outcome. For a long time, the space was, the conversation was around conserving what we have left, right, and protecting what we have. But when you've lost half of something, conserving what you have left simply isn't ambitious enough. And so, I've been talking about this for a number of years, and I see more and more people talking about the need to rebuild abundance, and with 2050 as the goal of having rebuilt that abundance. And so if you're talking about rebuilding something, then you have different KPIs, you have different milestones, you have different reporting. You're really looking for net positive gain in actual ecosystem health, in the numbers of creatures that are coming back. And if you look at fisheries, right now the world is feeding about 500 million people a day of protein meal, and in many parts of the world, that is food security. That is what children depend on for their brains to grow properly, for their bodies to be nourished. And that's with our global oceans being horrifically overfished. Imagine if we put scientific quotas in place and were able to manage them in a regenerative way, we could feed 1 billion people a protein meal a day. And knowing that wild fish has a much smaller carbon footprint than beef or lamb or even chicken. So, these regenerative ideas and solutions aren't just about saving the whales. It's also about saving ourselves and making sure that we are able to continue to thrive and prosper. There's also, the growing impacts of climate change. And so things like coral reefs and mangroves and seagrass beds are critical infrastructure, blue infrastructure that can protect coastal communities. If we've taken all of that out, those coastal communities are going to bear the brunt of the increased severity of storms and surge, and so insurance companies are going to be paying more. Real estate is going to cost more. There's going to be more costs associated, whereas if you preserve those ecosystems, then you're also preserving your investment.
Jason, what are the opportunities? Where can people invest their money? Where should they refocusing their attention? And how can they do it before the hammer drops and they're forced to do it? How can they be proactive?
Well, I think there's many, many opportunities in a business ecosystem that's big. I mean, there's a lot of innovation going on in finance at the moment. The sort of the blue economy, we're talking about blue carbon. We're seeing sovereigns engage in debt for nature swaps in the marine space, which is driving things. Data is a huge area for something that's so important. It's extraordinary that we have very, very little data around it. Obviously, renewable energy, offshore renewables, if it's done correctly, can be a big positive. For terrestrial-based businesses, packaging is one of the obvious options there in terms of alternatives to plastic. Chemicals have a huge impact, so shifting there, focusing on waste streams, ecotourism. I mean, it's an extraordinary long list of opportunities. But as I say, it's not, within shipping, you've obviously got zero emission shipping, ports and infrastructure, et cetera. But it isn't, as I say, the point I'd like people to take away is that it isn't limited to marine-based businesses. All businesses, as I say, 80% of the impacts come from terrestrial-based businesses. So their biggest opportunity to shift things is by things like the indirect impacts they have, things like packaging and that, as I say. And one thing I would say about mangroves and seagrasses as well, is one of the things that struck us in the report was that we all spend a huge amount of time talking about deforestation with climate change and how if that was a country it would be the third biggest emitter in the world. Mangroves and seagrasses have the ability to absorb 5 to 6 times the CO2 that terrestrial rainforests do. I mean, again, and it's how often do we hear people talking about it? It just doesn't get the attention and it should.
Well, and Jason, the other thing to that is you mentioned ocean forests, and there are the natural ocean forests, but let's not forget that seaweed farming is a form of agriculture that humans can practice that is regenerative to the oceans and has huge social implications in terms of the blue economy and empowering women and creating livelihoods that can help these communities and provide industrial feedstocks to major industries, whether it's fuel, fabrics, cosmetics, nutraceuticals, food. And so through seaweed farming, and we did a study on this, we're developing a voluntary carbon protocol for seaweed farms. There is an Amazon rainforest in the ocean that can help us to mitigate climate change and to make communities more resilient. So there's all of these new opportunities for investment that I think will help us bridge the gap between where we are now and where we need to go.
Well, to put it in perspective, where we've got to get to by 2050, if we're going to hit net zero, a fifth of the solutions could come from the oceans.
Yeah.
Well, in that context, it really brings me great pride to announce today a partnership between the FII Institute and Alexandra Cousteau on an initiative called The Wave. We are going to be focusing on ocean regeneration within 1 human generation. And while that may sound ambitious, it's both essential and it is highly achievable. We're very, very honored also to work with our chief scientist, Professor Carlos Duarte, if you don't mind standing up, who has demonstrated tangible roadmaps that can get us there. We believe that we can be a navigator, an inclusive collective action platform that will activate unique and diverse partnerships. And we believe in radical collaboration, partners who may never speak to each other on opposite ends of the spectrum of either activations and activism to the business sector. And our call to action is, both of you are valuable, both of you are necessary, both of you need to participate. If we want to achieve this goal, we have to achieve it together. And so this platform that we would like to create will provide access to resources to generate actionable ocean insights and spark global awareness and engagement and catalyze blue innovation and advance thought leadership. We wouldn't have been able to do this without the navigation of our chief navigator, Alexandra Cousteau, and the support of the FII, the Ministry of Energy, and all of our inaugural partners who were very proud yesterday to sign our letters of intent with. And together we believe that we're going to build a wave of change, and we invite you all to join us. And if you'll kindly turn your attention to the video, allow me to introduce you to The Wave. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And I suppose we would ask, what are you waiting for?